The desert morning spread wide across the Arizona plains, a gold haze shimmering above the dry earth. Ethan Cole wiped the sweat from his brow as he hammered the final nail into the fence post. His ranch stretched for miles, a lonely kingdom of dust, silence, and memories. He had inherited this land from his father, a man as stern as the land itself. But now, Ethan lived alone, his only companions the cattle, the wind, and the endless horizon. He was a man of few words, young but hardened by the wild. The neighboring ranchers called him, the Virgin Rancher, half in jest, half in pity. He never drank, never gambled, and never went near the saloon girls in town. His life was simple, predictable, and painfully quiet. That morning, however, everything changed. From the far edge of his land, a figure appeared through the heat waves, a rider on horseback, tall and proud. As she drew closer, Ethan realized it was a woman. Her long black hair was braided with feathers, her skin tanned from the desert sun. She wore deerskin clothing, torn and dusty from travel. Her eyes, sharp, amber, and wild, locked on him. Ethan instinctively reached for the rifle hanging near the fence, not in threat but in habit. "You're far from your people," he said cautiously. The woman slid off her horse, her movements graceful despite exhaustion. "My name is Naya," she said, her voice calm but heavy. "I am of the Apache. My tribe has scattered, soldiers burned our camp 3 nights ago." Ethan's chest tightened. The land was no stranger to such cruelty, settlers and soldiers often clashed with the Apache. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered. "I have nowhere else," she replied simply. "I need shelter, for a night, maybe 2. Her tone wasn't pleading. It carried the quiet strength of someone used to surviving without help. Ethan studied her, unsure. Bringing an Apache woman into his ranch could mean trouble. If soldiers or bounty hunters saw her, they might assume he was hiding an enemy. Yet, something in her eyes, not fear, but dignity, made him hesitate. He finally nodded. "You can stay. There's a small cabin by the corral. You'll find water there." Naya bowed her head slightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice almost a whisper. As she led her horse away, Ethan watched her silhouette fade into the sunlight. For the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel empty. That night, while the coyotes howled in the distance, he found himself glancing toward the small cabin. A strange warmth stirred in his chest, one he didn't understand, one he hadn't felt since his mother's passing. The desert wind carried her scent, smoke, leather, and freedom. Ethan didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change forever. The stranger who had arrived seeking shelter would awaken something inside him he never knew he possessed: love, courage, and the will to fight for more than just survival. The night spread over the Arizona desert like a blanket of dark velvet, the stars sharp and cold in the endless sky. Ethan sat outside his cabin, the firelight flickering across his weathered face. The crickets sang softly in the dry grass while the horses shifted in their stalls. It was quiet, until he heard footsteps. Naya appeared from the shadows, wrapped in a thin blanket. Her hair glowed faintly in the firelight, and her eyes, deep as amber, seemed to carry the weight of many untold stories. She sat across from him, silent for a long moment. "You're not used to company, are you?" she asked finally. Ethan managed a faint smile. "Not much around here to talk to except the wind," he said. Her lips curved just slightly. "The wind listens, but it doesn't answer." They sat in silence again, both staring into the fire. The flickering flames painted their faces in shades of gold and red. Then, Naya spoke again, her voice low, trembling but steady enough to hold truth. "When the soldiers came," she said, "they took everything. My people scattered into the hills. My sister, she didn't make it. My mother told me to run." Ethan listened without interrupting. He could see her fingers tightening around the blanket, the pain behind her calm tone. "I've been wandering since then," she continued. "I thought if I kept moving, maybe I could find what's left of my tribe. But the world outside the desert isn't kind to my kind. Men see only a savage, a prize, or worse." Her voice cracked. She looked away, blinking fast. Ethan's chest tightened. "I came here because I couldn't keep running," she whispered. "And because I thought maybe you'd understand what it's like to live alone with ghosts." Ethan swallowed hard. Her words hit him deeper than she could have known. He'd lost people too, his parents, his younger brother to fever, his sweetheart to the rough life of the frontier. Loneliness had become his only companion. "I understand," he said quietly. "More than you think." For a moment, their eyes met, and something changed in the air between them. The silence grew thick, charged with unspoken feelings neither dared to name. The fire cracked, and a gust of wind swept through, lifting her hair gently. Then, with a small, trembling breath, Naya said something that froze him. "I haven't been close to anyone in 6 months," she confessed. "Since before the soldiers came. I thought I'd forgotten what it means to feel safe, or wanted." Ethan's breath caught. He could see the fear in her eyes, not fear of him, but of her own vulnerability. "You don't owe me anything," he said, his voice rough. "You're safe here, that's all." But Naya shook her head. "Safety isn't all I want, Ethan," she murmured. "I just don't want to feel like a ghost anymore." The fire crackled again, and for the first time since she arrived, she smiled softly, fragile, real, and full of longing. Ethan looked at her, his heart pounding. He knew this moment would test every piece of restraint he had, but deep down, he also knew one thing for certain: this woman had already found a place inside him he could never let go of. The following days were quiet, filled with the rhythm of work and the slow rebuilding of trust. Ethan and Naya fixed the corral together, gathered water, and mended the barn roof. The ranch that had once been silent began to echo with the sound of her laughter, rare, small, but bright as a spark in the dark. Ethan found himself watching her more often, not with desire, but with admiration. The way she carried herself, strong and graceful despite all she had endured, made him feel something deeper than he could name. Naya, too, began to see Ethan differently, not just as a rancher, but as a man whose kindness came without expectation. One morning, as the desert sun climbed high, Naya paused while collecting water from the stream near the ridge. She looked toward the horizon, her instinct suddenly tightening. There, faint but certain, were horse tracks. 3 riders. She hurried back to the ranch. "Ethan," she called, her voice sharp, "someone's coming." Ethan grabbed his rifle and climbed the windmill tower for a better view. His jaw clenched. "Bounty men," he said. "I recognize the lead one. He rides with the soldiers." Her expression hardened. "They'll take me back, or kill me." "Not while I'm still breathing," Ethan replied. They worked quickly, spreading the horses in the canyon behind the barn and locking the gate. As the riders drew nearer, dust rising around them, Ethan stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. The lead rider, a scar-faced man in a Union coat, halted a few yards away. "We're looking for an Apache woman," he said coldly. "Seen anyone passin' through?" Ethan's face stayed calm. "Ain't seen a soul in weeks." The man's eyes narrowed. "Funny. Tracks say otherwise." He leaned forward in the saddle. "You hidin' her, boy." Before Ethan could answer, a shout came from behind the barn. One of the riders had found Naya's tracks by the stream. Shots cracked the air, the sound splitting the stillness. Ethan dove for cover, firing once, the echo bouncing off the canyon walls. Horses reared, and one of the bounty men fell. The others fled into the brush, dust and gunfire fading into the horizon. When it was over, Naya rushed from the barn, her breathing quick. "You didn't have to fight for me," she said. "Yes, I did," Ethan replied simply. "No one deserves to be hunted." She looked at him for a long moment, the words heavy between them. "Why?" she whispered. He paused, then said softly, "Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being a stranger." For a moment, the desert seemed to hold its breath. The wind stirred the dust, the horses shifted in the paddock, and 2 lost souls stood close enough to feel the same heartbeat, not out of fear, but something that finally felt like belonging. The day after the gunfight, the ranch stood eerily quiet. Smoke still rose from a scorched fence post, and one of the bounty men's horses wandered aimlessly across the field. Ethan leaned against the barn, his arm wrapped in a rough bandage. The wound wasn't deep, but it burned with every heartbeat. Naya knelt beside him, cleaning the cut with warm water. "You shouldn't have risked your life for me," she murmured. Ethan gave a half smile. "Wouldn't be the first time I've done something foolish." She pressed the cloth gently against his arm. "Not foolish," she said softly. "Brave." For a long while, they sat in silence. The desert wind blew warm, carrying the smell of mesquite and dust. Above them, the sky stretched forever, blue and endless. Ethan watched Naya, realizing he'd never seen her look so peaceful. The hardness in her eyes had melted away, replaced by quiet strength. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Can't stay hidden forever. More bounty men'll come." Naya looked toward the horizon where the sun blazed low. "I've spent my whole life running," she said. "Maybe it's time I stopped." He studied her face, searching for what she meant. "Stopped where?" Here, she whispered, if you'll have me. The words hit him like the crack of thunder after a long drought. Ethan stared, unsure he'd heard right. He'd lived years believing he'd never be enough for anyone, too plain, too quiet, too broken by solitude. But now, standing before him was a woman who saw him not as a rancher or a rescuer, but as a man worth standing beside. You mean it? He asked, his voice barely above the wind. She nodded. You gave me a home when I had none. I want to build something new, not as a captive, not as an Apache, but as myself. Ethan took off his hat, his hand trembling slightly. Then I reckon this old ranch just found its heart again. That evening, they buried the dead rider at the edge of the property, marking the grave with a simple wooden cross. As the sun sank beyond the hills, painting the desert in golden blood-red hues, Naya stood beside Ethan, her hand brushing his. Neither spoke. The silence between them said more than words ever could. When night came, they sat by the fire again, the same place where she had first told him her story. The flames danced in her eyes as she whispered, I used to believe the spirits had forgotten me. Ethan smiled softly. Maybe they just sent you the long way round. She laughed quietly, the sound like wind through the canyon. Maybe they sent me to you. Above them, the stars blazed brighter than ever, vast, eternal, and free. And beneath that western sky, two souls who had once been strangers found what neither had dared hope for. Peace, belonging, and a love strong enough to tame the wild itself. From that night on, the lonely ranch on the edge of the desert was no longer silent. The land, once filled with ghosts, now echoed with life, and the promise of forever.